Right then, this is gender. This is the last part of the first bullet point. We're going to look today at androgyny and measuring androgyny. Okay, now I've put this picture of Tilda Swinton here because when many of us hear the word androgyny, this is perhaps what will come to mind, someone with androgynous features. But actually what we're talking about here is psychological characteristics. So in psychology, androgyny is possessing both male and female psychological characteristics. What we mean by a psychological characteristic is something like confidence or aggression or gentleness, cheerfulness, those sorts of things. So someone who is androgynous will have a balance of both male and female psychological traits. We don't mean someone who is a female who possesses almost nearly completely male characteristics. That's not a balance. They would have to have a balance of male and female psychological characteristics. Now, Sandra Bem argued that this was a really good thing. She's the leading psychologist in this field. She argued that that androgyny is really good because it means that people have a wider range of responses to different situations. They can be nurturing at home but confident at work, and they're not constrained by sex role stereotypes. And Sandra Bem said actually that this was more healthy in terms of mental health than adopting fixed role stereotypes. Because, for example, if a man feels like they want to be really interested in cooking or really gentle, they don't have to sort of fight against their natural inclinations. They can just show that side of their personality and their character without being forced to fit into a fixed role stereotype. So that's what androgyny is. Going on to a little bit of evaluation, is androgyny really beneficial is the key question that we're asking here, because that's what Sandra Bem is arguing, that it's a beneficial characteristic. So what does the research say? A lot of research has suggested that it is beneficial. So, for example, self-esteem and well-being came up in this study here, Flaherty and Dusek. They found higher self-esteem and better emotional well-being, and more adaptable in those people who are androgynous. Equally, mental health, there's research to suggest it links well with good mental health. Prakash found lower depression scores in androgynous married Indian women than those who are feminine rather than androgynous. And then other research, on the other hand, has suggested that it's masculine traits that are the most helpful, because what they looked at all three then and found that actually there were lower depression scores in androgynous and masculine participants compared to feminine. So that's suggesting that it's not being androgynous as such which is causing the difference. It's that having masculine features, which people who are androgynous do possess some masculine characteristics as well. Okay, the last point here to make is that real world applications. So if it is really beneficial to be androgynous, then we ought to raise children in this way. We ought to be making an effort not to bring children up within fixed sex role stereotypes. We ought to be making an effort to bring children up without those stereotypes. But when, for example, the media report on parents who are doing this, there was a case in 2010 where the media reported on a couple who had raised their child completely gender neutral, and they were androgynous and not raised within sex role stereotypes. That couple were completely berated by many people, suggesting it was child abuse and so on. So lots of people believe that it's not beneficial. So if it is beneficial, we need to do a lot more research and find out more about that, and that could have implications. Right. Moving on then, the other thing that you need to know about is how we measure androgyny. So this is going back to AO1, our description at this point. And this was a way of measuring androgyny that came up with by Sandra Bem. So it's called the Bem Sex-Role Inventory. And we'll do this in class. There are 40 words, 40 adjectives that she narrowed down from lots of other adjectives into those final 40 words, where there were a third of them were masculine adjectives, a third were feminine, and a third were neutral. This was in 1974, obviously. And then she got people to rate each word on a Likert scale according to how far they felt that they matched it. And then at the end, you end up with a score based on how much you show of each characteristic, basically. And so the results, there were 4 categories, although one of them was added later. So originally there were these first 3 categories. Masculine was obviously where you had really high scores for most of the masculine words. Feminine, where you had high scores for most of the feminine words. Thirdly, androgynous, this was where you showed high scores for both female and feminine and masculine characteristics. And then this last category, undifferentiated, was added later for where you showed low scores on both masculine and feminine. And actually, in Bem's original research, she found that 34% of males and 27% of females were androgynous, which might be a percentage perhaps that you find surprisingly high. I don't know. So let's just think about that particular way of measuring androgyny to start with. If we think about doing some evaluation, it could be affected by response bias. So those who are who come out of the questionnaire as being androgynous do have higher overall scores. So that means it could be affected by response bias, which, if you remember, is where you basically give the same answer every time, or where some people perhaps just tend to answer higher in a questionnaire. If you tend to sort of basically just tick 8 or 9 for most things, then that shows that actually it could that affects the validity of the questionnaire, because the results aren't accurately reflecting the people that are doing the questionnaire. And then it might lack temporal validity. There's some conflicting research being done here. So the adjectives might not have masculine or feminine connotations anymore. So there was research by some people called Hoffman and Borders, and they basically gave all of the terms to some students and said, well, will you rate these as masculine or feminine? And actually the only ones that came out still endorsed as masculine and feminine were masculine and feminine, two really obvious adjectives. None of the others reached a 75% agreement rate, which was what they were looking for. So that suggests that actually since 1974 there are lots of changes in society, and that we wouldn't think necessarily of like confidence, for example, as being a masculine trait, or aggression even necessarily being a masculine trait. And that was certainly what was found in this study. And if you think about the changes in society since 1974, androgyny is much more widely accepted. You have things like metrosexual, ladette, those sorts of terms are widely known and accepted and understood. So actually that shows that really this research may lack temporal validity. Also, it's been, on the other hand though, it's been validated by Holt and Ellis. The Bem Sex-Role Inventory has been validated because they, again, gave all the terms to students who agreed with all but 2 of the terms that they should be classified as, these words should be classified as masculine and these should be classified as feminine. So all but 2 were validated there. So that suggests really that it is still valid. So we've got conflicting research here. On the positive side, it's got a really high retest reliability. If you remember, that's where you check the reliability of your measuring device by giving the questionnaire at one time and then later at another time, and checking that you've got a good correlation between the scores. It only measures personality, though. It doesn't measure behaviours, interests and abilities, all of which may be relevant to masculine masculinity and femininity. So that's kind of an important point to make, because it shows that it may be an incomplete way of measuring androgyny psychologically.